Otherwise, here's the video. Deal with it.
All right. Welcome to the Learning Technology Group. This session is entitled Plagiarism and Plagiarism Detection. Our leaders today are Elizabeth Stephen from the library and John Farquhar from ATUS. And let's see, I should probably let you know also that this might be the last Learning Tech group of the year. We might have one more led by a couple of students on Evernote and Dropbox. And but that's to be determined by their complicated schedules. And then also I want to give a plug for the Sound and Vision using audio and video to enhance learning, which is on Tuesday. So hopefully you can join us. Yes. And I will turn it over to Elizabeth.
Since this is such a small group, let's, and we're very flexible on how we want to present anything. We have a prepared presentation that Elizabeth and I gave at a conference a month ago, but we don't have to do any of that if it seems irrelevant. Largely what we've prepared is a discussion about plagiarism and what it is and how you can address it here at Western, and then some demonstration of a new tool that we have available for faculty to be able to test for plagiarism. But we want to hear why you're here and why you came and what you want to know from us. So it might be more appropriate for us just to introduce ourselves and how we can address your questions.
Steve Vanderstein, and teaching English and Vice Provost's office. And I once said to students, "Oh, I forgot to warn you, but if you use more than 3 words in a row or more that aren't your own, that's plagiarism, and you can be expelled from the university and get an F in this course." I didn't give you a warning. If you want to come, this was on a day papers were due. If you want to come get your papers and make sure there's none of that, that's okay, because I didn't warn you. And a third of my class came. Also, we are overwhelmed with academic honesty violations and the hearings. So I really want to, and we're rolling out a new academic honesty policy, and I really want to be able to tie that policy to Turnitin, the new use of the Turnitin and a campus-wide educational effort about plagiarism. Because I think as soon as we have the tool, we may get dozens more violations, and we would totally grind to a halt.
So how many do we get right now, and are they almost always related to plagiarism?
There's been 800 in the last, 30 years or something, they've become a really big deal by the time they come to the appeal process, because it takes so many people and the hearings are so formal. And we have had students expelled, we have had students we now have record keeping so that there's 2 violations, there's an automatic expulsion, and all sorts of sad stories of inadvertent things happening. So anyway, I think the timing is great.
Okay.
I'm Peter Agras. I've been teaching the workshops for Canvas, and I've noticed that there's a lot more interest in this topic and in the tool now that we've licensed it. So I missed this presentation at the conference. I'd like to see it.
I'm Andrew Blick. I'm the e-learning specialist for Extended Ed, and I'm interested in this primarily because it's the new tool, and faculty are going to have questions with it and whatnot, so I figured it'd be good to learn something about it.
Jen Green from LED, and I want to know how to use Turnitin.
I'm Kevin Dixie, instructional technologist. I work with Peter, same thing. I get a lot of questions about it in our training, and I also didn't make the other presentation.
And I'm Justina Brown, Center for Instructional Innovation, and I run this Teaching and Learning Center, and it's a question that comes up in consultation, as well as because I teach a seminar course with freshmen. I think it's a good opportunity to educate the students who are just coming to Western.
When you say the question comes up, what question?
Does Canvas have a tool? Our previous LMS had a tool. So I think it's come up in a consultation or two, and what are we going to do next?
So faculty have used a tool in the past, and they want to make sure that we continue to have a tool available.
Yeah. And when we weren't sure we were going to license Turnitin, it was a great concern of a few faculty.
Okay, so should I go through the more formal?
We had a few people that wanted to
Yeah.
see it, so.
Okay. My part of this is just to give you kind of an overview of plagiarism, what it is, but also maybe some understanding of what students see or how they see it, how they view it. Just to give some basic definitions, these are from our own definitions of academic dishonesty and plagiarism from Appendix D. So academic dishonesty, compromising the instructor's ability to fairly evaluate students' work. Plagiarism is using one's own using somebody else's work and presenting it as your own without acknowledgement. And I'm actually not in.
Not advancing.
There we go. Okay. So one of the things that, Steve, you were talking about unintentional plagiarism. I think that's one of the things that we've all experienced or all seen, this gray line between intentional and unintentional plagiarism. Some very basic differences, buying a paper, copying something flat out. I mean, that's obviously plagiarism. But when you get into paraphrasing or another word I came across, patch writing, these are gray areas, and students have a really hard time understanding what this means. What is paraphrasing? How do you paraphrase correctly? When do you cite? When do you not cite? This type of thing. We get questions about it in the library. Patch writing was a word I came across, a phrase I came across in a couple of different books. And I think this idea of patch writing is probably similar to what our students see as paraphrasing, where you copy the text and replace alternate words, here and there. But and I forget her first name, this Howard book. I have a list of citations at the end. She wrote a book in '98, and I think it's called Standing in the Shadows of Giants, about plagiarism, how students view it, and this type of thing. And she referred to patch writing as part of the learning process for students, especially when they get into a discipline. It's how they learn the language and how to write in a particular discipline. And so she talks about her own experiences of finding almost an entire class that what she saw as plagiarizing, and the more she looked into it and the more she talked to her students, she realized that what they were doing was just really learning the discipline, and so she needed to kind of change her own attitude towards what she considered plagiarism versus just learning. What can be done about this? Really, the best tool is education of both faculty and students. I think if you talk to faculty, if you talk to students, you're going to see different definitions of what they consider plagiarism. And I think that we need to get a better understanding of what both sides see. There also needs to be some set expectations in the classroom from faculty. Different disciplines have different views as to what is considered plagiarism or cheating. Lower level classes versus gen ed, or gen ed classes. Unfortunately, some students see gen ed classes as pretty much any, academic dishonesty that happens in gen ed classes or lower level classes. To some students, they don't see that as a problem, because a gen ed class is just something you need to get through to get to your upper level class. And then international students. This is also an issue, because in some cultures and in some areas, this idea of using somebody else's words is considered an honor and considered a good thing. And so this idea of giving credit for that isn't something that they're used to. And as more universities begin bringing in more international students, I think this is something that we need to address as they come into our academic culture, so that they understand what some of the expectations are. And then Turnitin. I mean, that's just one. That's the one we're talking about today. It is a tool, but it is just one tool. It's not going to fix everything. And what I handed out a photocopy from a book. This is a photocopy of 2 pages from The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Last fall, I taught a Library 201 class. It's an Intro to Research Strategies. And we discussed the concept of plagiarism. I always spend a little bit of time, at least a class period, going over this. We read a case study called Plagiarism or Innovation. And it is a case study of a student that plagiarized, a graduate student that plagiarized, and it goes through what the professor did. how she handled it, and what kind of discipline was taken. And I asked my students to write a reflection paper, a discussion paper on this, and they get really worked up over this case study. It's probably the most animated I saw my students, and any time I use this case study. And they're really opinionated about whether the student in this case is guilty or not guilty, and the majority think she's guilty. And they tend to get really hardcore, throw the book at her, and there are other things like the student in question was a grad student, and so they get very worked up about this. But in their papers, when they talk about it, many of them talk about how they have this very black and white defined idea of what plagiarism is. It's copying. And in the case that is used, it's not that black and white, she copied something, it's a little more gray. And so it's kind of eye-opening for a lot of them. It's something that they never really considered as far as what could be plagiarism or not. And then we talk about why we cite. And because if you ask a general undergraduate, why do you cite, it's so that I don't get caught cheating. And it's kind of, again, that idea of we're in this academic culture, and there is an idea that when you cite, you're citing to show what came before you and how that leads into what you are saying now. And students, that's not something that students necessarily grasp or something that they understand. And I think that's something that really needs to be addressed and talked to about students, because they really, to them, they cite so they don't get caught cheating, and that's it. So the in-class assignment that this handout relates to. I used this paragraph that's marked, and I set up a couple examples and walked through them in class and said, is this plagiarism, is this not plagiarism? So based on, skim that paragraph, and then I'm going to show you the examples that we went through in class. Oh, Justina, do you want me to put my hand on? So I gave them this example and asked, is this plagiarism? Yes or no?
So this print of the book.
Mm-hmm. And this is what I showed in class. And I asked the class, is this plagiarism, yes or no? Show of hands. So I'm asking that the same of you guys, yes or no? Yes?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
So why is this plagiarism?
Words in a row are the same.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, in highlighting, I copied this directly from there. I mean, and so when you talk to undergrads, this is what they understand as plagiarism, because I just took it verbatim. So what about this?
Still find 3 words.
Mm-hmm. Now, and so this is, highlighting, I just highlighted kind of some of the concepts and the ideas that I took from the paragraph. But when I asked students, is this plagiarism or is this not, about half of them said that it wasn't and half of them said that it was. And it was for a lot of the reasons that I just talked about. It wasn't a direct copy and paste. It was more the idea of taking a concept or an idea instead of the exact words. And that's, I think, where we see a lot of undergraduates get stuck, is because to them it is copying. It's not necessarily taking somebody's ideas or thoughts or concepts. And we had a larger discussion about this, and some of them really struggled with why or how this is plagiarism, because they couldn't get over that. If you copy it, it's plagiarism. If you don't, it's not. And, yeah.
If you cite the source at the end of that paragraph, is it no longer
Well, see, and that's, and I don't think, I took out one slide. I did, when in class, I had another slide after this where I started with, in her book, lax said, but that's it. And so I said, is this plagiarism? Is this not? And they were still confused because to them, well, no, it's not because you're saying it's coming from this book, but I didn't have a page number. And so I had that as an example of, this is an example of improperly paraphrasing or patch writing. The second example was a step closer to what or the third example was a step closer to what they needed to be, but it was incorrectly cited. And so it was, if a student were to do that, you could see that they were trying to do what they were supposed to do, but they weren't quite getting the technical parts right, the page numbers and all of this. They were trying to give, credit to where it came from, but they just weren't quite doing it right. This one would be a little more questionable. Did the student intentionally plagiarize with this, or did the student just think that this was okay? And like I said, with my students, they got really hung up on this, and because they were just so focused on copying word for word. And so I'm doing something like this, I think, in classes, especially when you're talking about writing, I think would be really useful or really important, because this is where they get stuck. And 201 is generally freshmen and transfers, and so they tend to be newer to either to academia or newer to Western, and so I think that's a good place for some of this to come up. So using something like Turnitin for these types of examples, no one thing will stop plagiarism. Turnitin isn't going to end all plagiarism, because there's a much bigger thing here, because campus culture does matter, and there is an ongoing discussion on campus with an academic integrity group, and I'm part of that group too. And one of the things we've talked about is, do we need an honor code? What about campus organizations? Should there be somebody? Steve, did you have something, or are you just moving around? Should there be a group on campus that deals specifically with this? Who should take, kind of take the lead on this? These things matter. If you're trying to figure out what to do, look at other schools, look for other examples and ideas, talk to a librarian about what can be done. ACRL is the Association of College and Research Libraries, and they have a database of tutorials. It's called the PRIMO database, and I don't remember what PRIMO stands for, peer-reviewed information something or other. But they have a search screen, or a search interface. It's not very good, but you can go in and search for plagiarism. And what you'll find is like online tutorials, modules, that type of thing that address plagiarism. And so what happens is, libraries design these, they submit them to ACRL, and then they review them all, and then the best ones end up in the database. There's also a site of the month, and there's several on there that deal specifically with plagiarism. At Western, we have LIT, it's the Library Information Tutorial. We're actually in the process of revamping this, but this is the current URL. And Module 6 deals with citing sources, and if you get farther into Module 6, you'll see that it deals specifically with, when do you cite, when do you not cite, and plagiarism, and how to avoid plagiarism and stuff like that. Other libraries have things. One of my favorites is University of Texas, and actually LIT, what we use for LIT, was originally based on something that University of Texas did quite a while ago called TILT, and it was the Texas Information Literacy Tutorial or something like that. This is kind of their revamped version of that. And this is, this is open to for people to use. It's not set up to be embedded in Canvas. It is set up to, you can use it in Blackboard. But this is open to everybody. Anybody can use it. There's a quiz, there's definitions, there's a video. It's actually a really good tool to give a basic overview of plagiarism and how it applies. And then these are just some recommended readings. Some of them are based on Standing in the Shadows of Giants. That's the book that mentioned the idea of patch writing. My Word is a newer book that is kind of an ethnography of college students and their attitudes towards plagiarism. And then this is the Plagiarism or Innovation is the case study that I used. And then this is just kind of an example. This last one is an example of Blackboard and Turnitin, Turnitin and Safe Assign, and comparing the two. And that's all I have. Do you have any questions?
So when Elizabeth and I gave this presentation at our conference, My portion of this was largely talking about some surveys and studies that we did here at Western. Because we were moving from the Blackboard tool that did plagiarism detection to Canvas, which didn't have that tool, and so we were investigating options such as Turnitin. Since then, we've gone ahead and determined that Turnitin was a tool that was very useful for us, as well as we got the price down far enough that we could afford it for at least a short period of time. And so we have begun a one-year licensing of Turnitin. Jen, what do you want to see? So I'm going to demonstrate some things here. Do you want to see how an instructor might integrate that into the Canvas course?
That would be good.
Okay, and then obviously you want to see kind of the results of what the Turnitin software provides you. Okay, okay. And Steve, is that similar?
Yes.
Okay. So Jen, are you using Canvas? No? Okay, great. So are you familiar with just setting up an assignment?
Yeah.
Then, okay. So I'm in a course right now, and there's a variety of ways of actually setting up an assignment. But let me go here to add a new assignment, and I'll call this term paper, and it'll be due at the end of the month. And 100 points. But what we need to do from here is to really go to the more options where we get the full screen of options for describing the assignment. So submit a 500-word plagiarized document. And then even down here, we've even got to go to show advanced options. We should select under submission type that this is going to be an online submission. Obviously, you need to have the student with an electronic document that then goes to Canvas and then submits that particular document online. And it needs to be a file upload, I believe, in order to utilize Turnitin. Now, I want to go ahead and check this off because I want to give Peter or Kevin a note as to this restrict upload file types. So this is telling the system that you're only going to accept certain file types like Word documents, PDF documents, or Excel documents. And there's a trick here. There's currently a bug to this. So what do you have to do, Kevin, to make sure this is right?
When you're putting in the file extensions, no periods and no spaces. Commas are fine.
So I should separate these with commas, perhaps,
Yeah, but no space.
but I shouldn't put in
No period and no space.
any spaces.
They're
Otherwise,
working on a fix, and when they fix it, then you'll be able
Yeah.
to put periods and spaces back in.
yeah, yeah.
But will it mess it up if you
Nope.
never put periods and spaces in
Nope.
again?
No, when I talked to him, they said it'll accept, from that point on, it'll accept whatever you have in there.
Okay.
So then the option right below that is the Turnitin submissions, and it's just an integrated part of Canvas. So let's go to take a look at the advanced Turnitin settings. So our options here for when students can see that report. So a report is generated sometime after the submission is made. So do you want to allow students to be able to see that before you've had a chance to see that? So you can choose to say, okay, they're only going to be able to see that report after you've done the grading or after the due date is there. So comparing it against. So there are three sets of data that the comparison is made. It will save all submissions that students make and then use that as a database to compare for new student submissions. Not just at our institution, but at any other institution that is using Turnitin. So we'll see an example of that as well. And then certainly we'll scan that document against the internet, and then we'll scan that document against a database of journals and periodicals that is largely EBSCO material.
They do EBSCO, JSTOR,
Okay.
and a few other publishers. How they interact with them, I don't know.
Okay.
But
So you can also tell it, don't look at the bibliography of the paper, because obviously those will be blocks that'll be specifically cited, specifically. Or if I have things in quotes, ignore that, ignore small matches. Those are different settings that you can employ. So let me just bug out of that.
Small.
Just the number of words, the amount of words, yeah. And I think I'll show you here later on that you can actually adjust that as well with how many words in a row. I think there's a setting for this, how many words in a row that you would consider it to be a match. So that's just how you would go about setting up a submission, an assignment that has the Turnitin set up for it. So I have already one in here where I have submitted a document. So I've gone to the gradebook, and here I've got this column is the plagiarism column, and this tells me that Turnitin has been set up, and if we select this, we see when the file was submitted, and here's the file itself. But this little box that looks like a dialog box or someone talking with that 65% is the link to the originality score. So it's a little kind of a small thing to find, and we can click on that, and it'll launch a new window and give us the analysis of the originality. And the big number here, 65% similar. And so 65% of this document it found was similar to other documents that it had in its databases. In this particular case, it matched to 4 different documents, and it's color-coded that across this paper. This paper is only 4 paragraphs right in front of us here. And you can see, for example, that first paragraph was just copied wholesale, but then you get down to this area down here, the pinkish color down here for number 2, there are shorter phrases, and so it might be a little bit more ambiguous. You'd have to do some more research to see, how closely this person was really copying previous material. So then you can go and take a look at the actual material that it came from. So this particular first one, let's see if I go here, it'll show me more of the context of where this came from. And this came from a journal online, and I guess I can click on this link, and it'll take me to a description of the journal that it found in this the article is Intentional in Existence and Phenomenal in Intentionality and Philosophical Perspectives, is where that article came from. And it looks like it found very similar matches of this article on the web, so this article probably exists on the web in a couple of places because it found the same thing in other locations. So let's go back and take a look at some of these other sources. And so number 2, it identified as being on the web. And here again is one of the phrases that is highlighted in context. And I could click on this link and actually go to the website, which is back here. So it found me the source document on the internet. Here's another.
Percentage
yep.
that refers to how much the original paper was copied, or is that
How much of this paper
is related to that document?
Yes, is related to that document. Yeah, it doesn't relate to how much of that document was copied, but how much of this document is part of the other document. Yeah. And then finally, this is an interesting example. This sentence or 2 right here in the second paragraph, identified as 4, matched to another student paper that was submitted to the database. Nothing else in that paragraph, and those particular sentences didn't match to anything else, but the student paper. So we can go and take a look at this, and actually there's a couple of other matches here. It matches some Wikipedia sources, so that's probably why it's also in some student papers. And then what it has here is that it doesn't give us direct access to that student paper. It tells us submitted to Buckeye High School, and then I have the option of requesting to the instructor of that student access to that paper. I haven't done this. I don't know how that works, but this is kind of a tricky area because it gets into the FERPA laws and to what extent can you share student work to other institutions and other people. And so they've just set this in as a step in the way. And I'm trying to get some specific guidance from our Attorney General as to what extent should our faculty respond to these requests. Because I think the answer is going to be no. If we get requested, you shouldn't do that. But at a minimum, any identifiable information ought to be stripped from that particular article.
And Turnitin was sued, actually by a group of high school students several years ago, saying that storing their papers was a violation, of their intellectual property. But there was, the decision from the federal court was that it was okay, and that it wasn't a violation and all of that. But
And that was at a federal level?
I think it was a federal. Actually, you'd have to look it up. It's on their website.
At the Turnitin website?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, but there has been some concern from people that keeping their papers is a violation of their intellectual property.
Yeah, I mean, there's two different concerns there. One is that, this is the student work, the student owns it, so how can that work then contribute to the Turnitin database where Turnitin is making money off of that particular asset? That's one question. And my understanding that University of Washington has decided that we're not going to use any of these services because of that concern. But then the other concern is the FERPA violation, is that student work is that you can't share the name associated to that work to outside the institution. But I would imagine, my guess is that if you're really concerned about, mostly I would say that if you're really concerned about students copying work from other students, it probably is happening at the same institution. It'll tell you, I don't know what it does. I don't know if it actually gives you access to that document or not, if it's at the same institution. Because that's how Safe Assign worked, I think, is if it was at the same institution, you had access to the document. Other institutions, I'm not sure how that worked.
I don't think you had access.
Before students
Yep.
submit then on Canvas, because it's linked to Turnitin, they're directed to go through the Turnitin process before they're allowed to submit it into Canvas.
There's actually just one additional, they're submitting it to Canvas, just like they would otherwise, but I think that there's one additional checkbox that exists that, let's take a look at that in a moment. And again, I'm waiting for some clarification from our AG, because we can add some additional language in there when students are submitting their work to the Turnitin database that makes sure that they're notified what's happening with that.
So that they know that they're being watched.
It just, actually right now, the message is, I'm agreeing that this is my original work. That's all it says right now, but we can modify that message that lets them know more about what's happening. Yeah, Andrew?
That shows up on all assignments.
Does it show up on all assignments?
That's what I was trying to remember.
Ah,
when I was
okay.
playing around with this.
So that checkbox,
Got to check the box.
regardless of whether it's a Turnitin assignment or not.
Yeah.
Okay, I do know that Turnitin does allow us to have some additional text there if we want it, and I haven't been given any direction as to what specifically we need to be saying there. Yeah, Andrew?
I'm not 100% sure how this would work, so maybe you'd have, because you did use Turnitin for some of your courses, correct?
I didn't use Turnitin. We
Okay,
didn't have
okay.
it yet. I've played around with it, but I have a sandbox course that I've.
So how does it react with draft assignments? So if you turn something in as a draft, as an assignment, and you have, like, let's say 80% of your work done, and then it, runs the plagiarism check and says, okay, you're fine, and then you turn it in again, will it match your paper with your draft paper that you turned in before?
I suspect it probably will.
100%
Yeah.
plagiarized.
Because I'm thinking some faculty are going to get reports that have, potentially, depending on how many drafts they have, quite a few samples of plagiarism. So I hope that they understand that.
Could you just not have a Turnitin version for the drafts?
You could certainly do that.
Unless
Well,
that's part of,
Right, unless
You
right,
you
you
want
want
that
students
for-
to be thinking about that when they're drafting.
And clearly, this number in and of itself doesn't really mean much. You really have to see
Yeah.
where it comes from, how much. You really have to do a little bit of that analysis. It shouldn't take, but a quick look at this list. But that number doesn't, it's not that meaningful.
In the original, in the presentation that John and I did earlier, I took these slides out for the matter of time, but I actually took the examples that I showed here and ran them through Canvas, through Turnitin, because I wanted to see if it would pick up. And what I copied directly, it did, but it told me, it didn't say it came from this book. I got this huge long list of student papers that it was matching. And then I took the paraphrased paragraph and ran it through, and it said it was fine.
That's what I
And-
was wondering,
and-
if you change enough words.
You change enough words, but I think that part of the issue was also that this generally focuses on, I'm not 100% positive on this, but I'm guessing this focuses mainly on online sources. So print sources might
Well,
be.
this was from a book.
Yes.
Yeah, and so that book would not be in a journal database or on the web.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I tried another example, because I'm really curious, and I think we'd have to talk to Turnitin about this, how it works with the various database vendors. You know, they don't outline on their website how, it just says we work with them. So I went through and took some copied and pasted stuff just directly from a couple of journal articles in EBSCO, and then ran that through. And it caught all of them. One of them was an open source journal, and so it just went directly to the journal website. The other one was from a library journal from college and research libraries. And I found two places at least, one a student paper, and then two the article, because it's also open source. And there was another one that I took, and I don't remember exactly what it was. It didn't direct me to that direct article. It was a little more difficult for it to track down. It still indicated there was something wrong here, but it didn't quite get to the original source that I had cited.
Is the 3-word, it's not a hard fast.
I never heard that before. 3 words as being identified as
That's
plagiarism.
really tough because, I mean,
Yeah.
people use the same 3-word. I mean,
Yeah.
I was just curious as to what the university sits on.
That's something that I think that, I mean, if you look at, I mean, our definitions of plagiarism are all in the Appendix D, and I don't think there's anything in that. It's probably a department decision. But that was, when we had these discussions, you know, in my class about it, that was one of the questions that came up, was
Quantify
there,
it.
well, it was, people before me have used these 3 words or this phrase before. I'm not the first person to use this phrase. Why is that considered plagiarism? You know, and that's what they got really got stuck on.
And Steve's class, I think he was referring to as a creative writing course, so it might just be a little less likely that you'd have those 3 words.
Right.
But,
Still,
yeah, it's pretty tough, yeah.
3 words, yeah.
When, like, you know, if you're talking about, you know, sociocultural theory, you know, it's like Vygotsky or whatever, and they're like, you know, if you believe that we learn from each other, you know, it's a community of learning, they're like, well, I had that idea before I read about it, so therefore I have to cite it. And students get very upset having to cite previous researcher.
Well, and that's, again, that's something else. It's, you know, and because I had one student in particular who was just like, I can't, somebody else in the world has said this before, and do I need to track that down to make sure that I'm not being, and it's like, no, that's not, you know, and it's just a really difficult.
It's very great.
It is such a gray area.
Can students generate their own report from
Yes.
Turnitin? Okay.
Even if we don't hit immediately, if we hit after.
No, the instructor still has to set up that assignment. Yeah, so, and you have to, it's just
Right.
done the same way. I
They
don't
can't
know.
go to Turnitin and submit it
Other-
themselves to double check.
No, I don't believe there's any
So if I say I
student
want it,
option.
I won't let them get their report until after I grade it, for example. Then
I
there's
think
no
we
way
should
for
look
them
into
to.
that. I'm not sure on that.
You think that there might be an option for students to get their own report without,
Well, you definitely with
submitting it to the
Safe
instructor.
Assign, you could
Grammarly
generate
has
a
that too.
report
I think you
before you
can.
submit it.
Because when I first tried, I don't remember what I did. When I first tried it with my sandbox course, I did something and I ended up on their website
Uh-huh.
with
So
a
from the
student
Turnitin
report.
website, I think there's a free check.
Something like that, because I actually asked some of our student workers if their professors used Safe Assign, and none of them did. But one of them said that in high school they used Turnitin, and she said that she really liked it because she could run her paper through before and find out,
Yeah, I mean, that
you
makes
know,
sense. In
where,
case there's something that,
right.
you know,
And
you
then
have
she
3
could-
words lined up.
Right,
you
and
just
then she
change
could
a
go back
couple
and double
of
check it.
words.
But then is they going to store that paper
originality?
under some anonymous
Or,
submitter?
so this is a tutorial mode,
So
so
you
it's
get
not
And
double-
then it'll say you submitted a paper
Yeah,
and it
that
won't be
was-
connected at all to the class, and the instructor will say, oh, is this a plagiarized paper?
Writing.
Good question.
Yeah, so
So
you need
it's
to create
like
an
it's taken
account.
set up
You know,
on
by the
Yeah.
time you're done, you could
Yeah,
be plagiarizing
it's not
10
free.
papers. and
There
they'd all
was
be
some,
your
go
own.
back to Canvas.
Well,
To-
there's a product, Grammarly,
Yeah, it
that
wasn't.
is
very-
offering
okay.
that. Okay, so go back to
Safe
Canvas.
Assign.
That tells
would
you,
be-
like,
yeah,
it's
you could get
well
your
written,
own
right?
paper
You
back
too
as a
many
source.
It's a combination.
Submit
Right, it's
one
both.
answer to a different class.
So you want me to try to submit as a student?
Told you
Go to
it was
your
own
grade
paper.
book and go to
It doesn't
the,
look
go
like
to
it.
the assignment.
When you go to the assignment? or
Oh, no,
go
I
to
mean, I'm
the
sorry, go
submission?
to the report in Canvas. Sorry.
Go to the report?
Yeah, click on the little bubble there.
You want me to go here?
No, it seems like, or maybe I was looking at it in the
Well,
student view.
Yeah, if I go to the student view,
student
the
view.
student can see that report, certainly.
Right.
So let me,
Maybe that's what I was thinking of. Yeah, so you'd probably have to have.
The student
That's
view.
a really good question of would it match?
But it's probably good that it's submitted with their name then, because if it was submitted through some generic third party.
So they-
I knew that was.
Yeah.
It would identify it as plagiarized.
Because it seems like I submitted,
Connected to them.
I did a test, I submitted a test paper, and I think I submitted in Safe Assign, and then I submitted it again and turned it in, and if I remember correctly, when I checked it and turned it in, it was like 100% plagiarized, WWU. And so-
Students would definitely do that. It
Yeah.
would stack them up and say, you
Yeah.
plagiarized 100% from yourself.
Yeah, but it seems like I got it and turned it in too. I have to check.
I'd be curious if, if it finds a student paper, that other student paper, the owner of that,
Yeah.
it's like, they might want to know.
That's, when I found the one where I just copied and pasted stuff from articles, and the one that showed up was some student at Southern Miss, and it was like, I wonder if this student got busted for plagiarizing.
Right.
I thought this was curious.
Yeah.
So I just wrote this random paper and put it in here, and this is one of the matches that it came up with. It came up with this publication match, but it also came up with all these internet sources. And as I scrolled down here, it actually is citing one of our servers, and this,
Yeah.
I don't.
Oh, it's a Trimble, but it's his Vita.
But yes, and what's interesting is that really the only match that it had here was I think it was like just this phrase: American Indian psychologists and psychology graduate students.
Yeah.
That was the phrase, which
That's hard to,
Yeah.
some things are
Two
harder
people
to
could have said
paraphrase
that.
than others.
Yeah.
Yeah, two people
And,
could have said
and one of the test papers that I tried, and I looked at, where it was being cited from, some of the sites were bizarre, and I had to kind of dig through them before I found the original one. But it just kind of showed you that original source that had been plagiarized for this paper, how many other websites had borrowed text from that original source.
My husband had used Turnitin, I think it was, or something similar to that, for his graduate work. And he wrote, we got the report back. And I was looking at it, but it was like, they claimed he had taken something from some medical journal or something, like something he had never
Right.
looked up. And so it was kind of like, well, that's kind of just a coincidence of
Yeah, random.
word matching.
Right.
So something else to.
What's Right Check for students? Is that a free tool? The big yellow button?
Yeah, I tried that. It's you can do it, but it's that $8 a paper.
Whoa.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to get to, though, because we had this question about number of word orders, so you can come in here and you can change these settings in here, including how many words. So it's got to be at least 10 words or something like that in order for it to actually come up in the report as being matching.
Now, you applied those changes just to this paper, though?
Or is that forever and
Oh,
ever in your?
good question.
That would be
I
for
don't
that
know.
paper, it looks like.
Looks like it.
Plus, it looks like you apply these changes after it's been submitted.
Right.
And so the student, again, I don't know what report the student sees after I come in here.
Do all students have to take a library course on grading? Okay.
No.
Do students with their first violation have to take the library course?
No, they go through the Dean of Students. I had to look it up.
The Dean of Students does put them through a little tutorial.
Yeah, they go through a little tutorial. That's like this weird CD-ROM. Because I was actually going to use it in my class. I was thinking about using that as, to show students, is this plagiarism, is this not? And it was just kind of, it's old. But I kind of used, I liked the idea of taking something that it in print and then kind of changing it and asking. And so that was kind of the idea that I took from there to use in class.
Well, I guess that feature either doesn't work well or it takes a long time to,
Redoing the report.
yeah.
And
Uh,
sometimes the report, I noticed when I was, again, just playing with it, sometimes it would take a little while for the report to come back. It wasn't automatic.
It's doing a lot.
Yeah.
Right, searching millions of.
Yeah, and it was, basically the longer it was and the more complex it was, the longer the report took.
But everything I've read from other people's experiences is the reports are generated faster than the Blackboard tool. And the Blackboard tool always would have some problems at the end of every term, it seems like. They would report some slowdowns in their process. But I haven't seen the same complaints for Turnitin. And again, we've only been working for it for a couple of months.
And what little I have read comparing the two, people seem to like Turnitin more than Safe Assign.
I never used it. I didn't know it existed.
Yeah. And I asked, and at some universities, libraries administer this, at some universities, the tech people administer it. And I asked a librarian at another university who did kind of the training for it, what they did about when you get like 1 million links and some of them are dead and you can't really quite tell what it's actually pulling from. You can't find it's just kind of, sometimes it'd be kind of overwhelming with how many sources it says that it's pulling from. What do you do? And they said there's no way to exclude those. You can't say like, don't give me a dead link or whatever. But he said for them, it was that red flag of there's something wrong here. And so then they would just kind of go from, they would use that as an indication that somebody needed to talk to the student and they need to kind of figure out what was going on. So.
I wish Steve was here because I have more questions about the students that are flagged for academic dishonesty and plagiarism in general. Just how are those detected? Because I'm sure faculty who don't use this tool, before this tool came along, I would copy phrases and put them just as a Google search to see if I could find them on the internet.
If you accuse someone, you have to go through a process, but, I don't.
Yeah, I want to know what evidence that faculty are presenting right now. How are they getting that evidence? Is it just a Google search? Is it,
I don't know.
what? I watched the movie on Netflix the other night, Finding Forrester. Anyone see that?
Oh, wait, that's with.
Sean Connery
Yes.
and a young student who's accused of plagiarizing Forrester's work, Sean Connery's work. Yeah, and it was, so yeah, there's a scene where, I should have played it, where the scene where one of the profs says, I found this in the New Yorker. I'm like, how did he do that? How did he dig up the actual New Yorker journal, and find that match? All right. Interesting topic.
Promising. I'm wondering how sustainable the product will be as the number of sites it has to search explodes daily. So it'll be interesting if they can keep up with that.
Find out around finals time, probably.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I just know because I also had, I'd never used Safe Assign and Blackboard, and I actually asked Peter and somebody else to set up a sandbox class for me in Blackboard so that I could play with it. And oh my God, this was so much easier. Because
I've not seen it.
No, and then every time I'd have to go back and check it, I'd have to relearn where the files went because there was a separate place for them, and it was not. This is much easier.
Yeah. There were some bad things about Safe Assign in the beginning. If all the reports were not generated, faculty could not get access to their gradebook. So when the slowdowns happened,
It couldn't even get to their
they couldn't even
grade.
get to their gradebook.
Wow.
If you remember that, John.
No,
that
I don't
we
remember
had
this.
A number of people who were locked out, and it was right at finals, trying to get their grades turned in and things.
You get unhappy.
And, oh yeah.
I can't understand
Nothing
why.
worse. If you're locked out of your gradebook on the last day of class.
class.
Great,
Thank you.
thank you. Thanks, Adrian.